"That rusted truck doesn't belong in my parking lot," the CEO said with a laugh. And within 20 minutes, she would discover that the man behind its wheel had helped build the very company whose name was printed across the glass tower above her head. The morning sun reflected off hundreds of mirrored windows as Harrison Dynamics headquarters came alive in downtown Denver. Employees streamed through the revolving doors carrying laptops, coffee cups, and ambitious plans for another profitable day. Luxury sedans filled the executive parking spaces. Black SUVs lined the curb. Everything about the building projected success, power, and prestige. Then an aging Ford F-150 rolled slowly into the visitor section. The truck looked like it had survived 100 Colorado winters. Its paint had faded years ago. Rust traced the edges of the wheel wells. The engine gave a tired rumble before settling into silence. A few employees glanced over and smirked before continuing toward the entrance. Ethan Brooks stepped out, closing the driver's door with a gentle push. He wore worn jeans, work boots, and a faded flannel shirt beneath a brown jacket that had clearly seen better days. His silver-streaked hair moved lightly in the morning breeze as he grabbed a weathered folder from the passenger seat. There was nothing remarkable about him at first glance. Nothing that suggested influence, wealth, or importance. Just another middle-aged contractor arriving for a meeting. Ethan paused for a moment and looked up at the towering building. The company logo gleamed above the entrance. Harrison Dynamics. The sight stirred something behind his calm eyes, something old and distant. Memories he rarely allowed himself to revisit. But before he could take another step, a sleek black Bentley turned into the executive lane. Employees immediately straightened. Conversations quieted. The vehicle came to a stop near the front entrance, and Olivia Harrison emerged. At 34, she carried herself with the confidence of someone who had spent her entire life inside boardrooms. Her tailored navy suit, flawless posture, and focused expression made it clear why investors admired her. Under her leadership, Harrison Dynamics had become one of the fastest-growing technology firms in the country. She handed her keys to a valet and started toward the building. Then she noticed Ethan's truck. Her pace slowed. Her eyes narrowed slightly. "Who owns that thing?" she asked. A nearby manager followed her gaze. "Not sure, Miss Harrison." Olivia let out a short laugh. "It looks like it belongs in a junkyard." Several employees chuckled politely. "Seriously," she continued, shaking her head. "We spend millions protecting this company's image, and that truck is the first thing clients see." More laughter followed. Ethan heard every word. He simply closed his folder and remained still. The cool morning wind moved through the parking lot. Somewhere in the distance, a flag snapped against its pole. Olivia glanced briefly toward him. "Sir, you should probably park that somewhere else. We have standards here." The manager smiled awkwardly. A few employees exchanged amused looks. Ethan met Olivia's gaze for the first time. His expression never changed. There was no anger, no embarrassment, only a quiet steadiness that somehow made the laughter feel smaller than it had a moment earlier. "I understand," he said calmly. Olivia nodded, already losing interest. She turned and headed toward the entrance as dozens of employees followed behind her. But none of them noticed the name written on the oldest document inside Ethan's weathered folder. And none of them knew that 25 years earlier, before Harrison Dynamics occupied a glass tower worth billions, before investors, executives, and headlines, the man standing beside that rusty truck had helped create the company from nothing alongside Olivia's father. Ethan waited until the flow of employees disappeared into the building before he finally started walking toward the entrance. The glass doors reflected the city skyline behind him, but his eyes remained fixed on the lobby ahead. 25 years earlier, there had been no tower, no marble floors, no executive parking. Back then there had only been a rented warehouse, folding tables, second-hand computers, and two young men willing to risk everything on an idea. The memory lingered for a moment before he pushed it away. The security desk stood beneath a massive display showing company milestones. Awards, product launches, revenue records, smiling photographs of executives from different eras. Ethan noticed something familiar immediately. Richard Harrison's face appeared again and again throughout the timeline. Founder, visionary, industry leader. The title made Ethan smile faintly. Richard would have hated being called a visionary. He always said success belonged to teams, not individuals. The receptionist looked up as Ethan approached. "Good morning, sir." "Name?" "Ethan Brooks." She typed quickly, then paused. Her eyebrows lifted slightly. "You are expected by engineering operations." Ethan nodded. "That is right." She handed him a visitor badge. "Conference room 12, 34th floor." "Thank you." As he headed toward the elevators, another voice called out behind him. "Mr. Brooks?" Ethan turned. A young employee hurried over carrying a tablet. He looked barely 30. Nervous. Respectful. "I am Daniel Perez from engineering. I have been assigned to escort you upstairs." Ethan extended his hand. "Nice to meet you, Daniel." The younger man shook it. "Likewise, sir." Together, they entered the elevator. As the doors closed, Daniel glanced toward Ethan's visitor badge. "I heard you worked on infrastructure systems." "Something like that." "Well, people are talking about this meeting." Ethan looked at him curiously. "Talking?" Daniel laughed awkwardly. "The company is preparing for the Atlas rollout next month. Biggest launch in our history. Everyone is under pressure." Ethan nodded slowly. "Atlas." The name alone explained why Richard's old attorney had called him 2 weeks earlier. The elevator climbed quietly through the building. Floor after floor passed beneath them. Meanwhile, across the tower, Olivia Harrison stood before a wall-sized digital presentation in the executive boardroom. Investors joined remotely from New York, Chicago, and San Francisco. The company's leadership team filled the room. Confidence radiated from every corner. "Atlas will redefine the market," Olivia said. "We are 6 weeks ahead of projections and positioned to dominate the sector." Heads nodded around the table. Compliments followed. Forecasts were praised. Growth projections drew smiles. The atmosphere felt almost celebratory. No one wanted to question success. No one wanted to be the voice of caution. Back inside the elevator, Daniel hesitated before speaking again. "Can I ask you something?" "Of course." "How long have you been consulting?" Ethan looked toward the moving floor numbers above the door. "Long enough to know that every system eventually tells the truth." Daniel blinked. "What does that mean?" A faint smile touched Ethan's face. "It means problems do not disappear because people ignore them." The elevator doors opened onto the 34th floor. Bright hallways stretched ahead. Glass offices overlooked the city. Employees moved quickly between meetings. Everything appeared polished, efficient, successful. Yet as Ethan stepped into the corridor, his eyes settled on a technical diagram displayed on a nearby monitor. He stopped walking. The calm expression on his face changed almost imperceptibly. Something in the Atlas architecture was wrong. Very wrong. And for the first time that morning, a quiet concern settled into his eyes. Daniel followed Ethan's gaze toward the monitor. Lines of architecture diagrams stretched across the screen in bright colors. Data pathways, security layers, automated recovery systems. To most employees passing through the hallway, it looked impressive. To Ethan, it looked unfinished. "Is something wrong?" Daniel asked quietly. Ethan studied the diagram for another few seconds. "Who approved the synchronization layer?" Daniel frowned. "I think the executive technology team signed off on it last quarter." Ethan pointed toward a section near the center. "That dependency should never be connected directly to a live deployment environment." Daniel leaned closer. "Why not?" "Because if one node fails under a heavy transaction load, the entire chain can begin creating false recovery requests." Daniel stared at the diagram. "You figured that out from one glance." Ethan looked away from the screen. Years of experience teach you where problems like to hide. Before Daniel could respond, a voice echoed from the end of the corridor. "There you are." A woman in a gray business suit approached carrying several folders. "The meeting starts in 5 minutes." Daniel nodded. "We are on our way." They entered conference room 12 moments later. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the Denver skyline. Engineers, project managers, and senior consultants filled the room. Coffee cups sat beside laptops. Multiple screens displayed Atlas performance projections. The atmosphere carried the energy of people racing toward a deadline. Ethan quietly took a seat near the far end of the table. Several attendees glanced at him briefly before returning to their conversations. Most assumed he was another outside contractor. No one paid much attention. At the same time, 3 floors above, Olivia stood in her executive office overlooking the city. The board presentation had gone perfectly. Investors were pleased. Analysts were optimistic. Everything pointed toward success. Her chief financial officer entered carrying a tablet. "Excellent meeting," he said. Olivia smiled. I know. The board loves the rollout schedule. As they should. She walked toward the window. Atlas is going to change this company forever. The chief financial officer hesitated. There is one thing. Olivia turned. What? Some engineering consultants requested an additional review period. Her smile faded slightly. Again? Yes. How many times do they need reassurance? He shrugged. Engineers worry. Olivia shook her head. That is why leaders make decisions. Downstairs, the engineering meeting began. A project director stood and launched into a detailed presentation. Charts appeared. Forecasts filled the screens. Timelines received enthusiastic approval. Ethan listened quietly. Every few minutes he made a note inside a small notebook. By the time the presentation reached its conclusion, several pages were filled. The director smiled confidently. Questions? Silence followed. Around the room, heads nodded. Everything appeared settled. Then Ethan slowly raised his hand. Several people looked surprised. The director forced a polite smile. Yes, Mr. Brooks? Ethan opened his notebook. I have 4 concerns. The room became still. The synchronization architecture creates a cascade vulnerability. A few engineers exchanged glances. Ethan continued. The recovery protocol contains a timing conflict. Another pause. Your load balancing assumptions are optimistic by at least 30%. The project director's smile disappeared. Ethan flipped one page. And your emergency failover sequence could trigger a system-wide outage during peak demand. Silence settled over the room. A moment earlier, everyone had been celebrating. Now several engineers were staring at their screens. One senior architect adjusted his glasses and looked visibly uncomfortable. The director cleared his throat. Our internal reviews found no such issues. Ethan nodded respectfully. Then your reviews missed them. The words were calm. Not arrogant. Not hostile. Just factual. Across the room, nervous laughter emerged from one corner of the table. Another consultant leaned back in his chair. That is a pretty bold claim. Ethan closed his notebook. Not a claim. His voice remained steady. A warning. And for the first time that day, a quiet feeling of uncertainty began moving through the room like a cold wind before a storm. The conference room remained quiet for several seconds after Ethan spoke. The project director forced a smile and folded his hands together. Mr. Brooks, we appreciate outside perspectives, but Atlas has already passed 6 independent reviews. A few people nodded immediately. Another consultant leaned forward. This system was built by some of the best engineers in the country. I do not doubt that, Ethan replied. Good people can still overlook critical assumptions. The director tapped his pen against the table. And you found all of these concerns in less than an hour? No, Ethan said calmly. I found them in less than 10 minutes. A few chuckles moved around the room. One manager shook his head. That is impossible. Ethan did not argue. He simply opened his notebook and slid it across the table. Detailed diagrams filled several pages. Calculations. Failure sequences. Recovery conflicts. Handwritten notes connected by arrows and observations. The senior architect who had looked uncomfortable earlier picked up the notebook. His expression changed almost immediately. He adjusted his glasses and began turning pages faster. Where did you get these numbers? He asked quietly. From your own presentation. The room grew still again. Before anyone could continue, the conference room door opened. Olivia Harrison entered with 2 executives trailing behind her. Conversation stopped instantly. The atmosphere shifted the way it always did when a chief executive entered a room. Olivia glanced around the table. I hope I am not interrupting. Not at all, the director said quickly. We were just finishing. Her eyes moved across the room until they landed on Ethan. Recognition flashed across her face. You. Several people exchanged confused looks. Olivia folded her arms. I remember you. Ethan nodded politely. Good afternoon. The director looked between them. You know each other? Olivia gave a short laugh. We met in the parking lot. Nobody missed the implication in her tone. The room became awkward. Daniel stared at the table. The senior architect slowly lowered Ethan's notebook. Olivia glanced toward the presentation screen. What is the issue? The director cleared his throat. Mr. Brooks believes he found several structural concerns in Atlas. Olivia raised an eyebrow. Believes? He is warning about deployment risks. Olivia looked at Ethan. And how long have you been reviewing the project? About 40 minutes. A few executives smiled. Olivia shook her head slightly. Our engineering teams have spent 3 years building Atlas. Her voice remained professional, but the skepticism was obvious. I find it difficult to believe a consultant can discover problems that hundreds of specialists somehow missed. Ethan met her gaze. That is fair. The response caught her off guard. No argument. No defensiveness. Just calm acceptance. Then he added, the problem is not that people missed them. The problem is that people stopped questioning them. Silence followed. Outside the glass walls, clouds drifted across the Denver skyline. Sunlight faded briefly from the conference room. The senior architect looked down at the notebook again. Slowly, almost reluctantly, he spoke. Actually, I would like more time to review these findings. The director stared at him. You are serious? Very. Olivia's expression hardened slightly. The schedule was already set. Investors were waiting. The launch date had been announced publicly. Delays were expensive. That was dangerous. She looked back at Ethan. Thank you for your input, Mr. Brooks. We will take it under consideration. The words sounded polite, but the decision was clear. The meeting was over. Ethan closed his notebook and stood. Then I hope I am wrong. He picked up his folder and headed toward the door. Nobody stopped him. Nobody followed him. Yet as the door closed behind him, the senior architect continued staring at the calculations on the page, and for the first time since Atlas had been approved, he felt something he had not felt in months. Concern. The elevator doors closed behind Ethan as he left the 34th floor. He did not look frustrated. He did not look angry. If anything, he looked tired. The kind of tiredness that came from watching people repeat mistakes that could have been avoided. He stepped into the underground parking garage 20 minutes later and walked toward his old Ford. The concrete structure echoed with distant footsteps and humming ventilation fans. For a moment, he stood beside the truck without opening the door. Then he pulled his phone from his pocket and stared at a contact he had not called in months. After a few seconds, he put the phone away. Some lessons, he knew, could not be taught. They had to be learned. Meanwhile, on the top floor, Olivia returned to her office overlooking the city. The afternoon sun painted long shadows across the polished hardwood floor. Her chief financial officer followed her inside carrying reports. You handled that well, he said. Olivia loosened her jacket slightly. Handled what? The consultant. She walked toward her desk. He is entitled to his opinion. Do you think there is any merit to his concerns? Olivia paused briefly. No. The answer came quickly. Too quickly. She sat down and opened her tablet. Atlas launches in 6 weeks. We are not delaying because one contractor found theoretical problems. The chief financial officer nodded, but his expression suggested uncertainty. Before leaving, he hesitated. The senior architect requested access to Mr. Brooks's notes. Olivia looked up. Granted. You want a review? I want everyone satisfied. He nodded and left. The office grew quiet. Beyond the glass walls, Denver stretched toward the mountains beneath a clear blue sky. Olivia returned to work, but her concentration drifted more than once. She remembered the man in the parking lot, the calm way he had responded, the absence of embarrassment. Most people reacted when challenged. They defended themselves, explained themselves, tried to prove something. Ethan Brooks had done none of those things. A soft knock interrupted her thoughts. Come in. Her executive assistant entered carrying a small storage box. This was delivered from the Harrison family archives. Olivia frowned. Archives? The estate team has been reorganizing old records from your father's properties. She placed the box on the desk. They thought you might want anything personal before it goes into storage. Olivia glanced at the faded cardboard container. Just leave it there. The assistant nodded and exited. For nearly an hour, the box remained untouched. Financial projections, investor calls, strategy reviews. The day continued, yet eventually curiosity won. Olivia opened the lid. Inside were old photographs, notebooks, company sketches, and handwritten documents from the earliest years of Harrison Dynamics. She smiled faintly at a picture of her father standing beside an unfinished prototype in what looked like a warehouse. He was younger than she remembered. Hopeful, determined, human. Beneath the photograph rested a sealed envelope. Her father's handwriting covered the front. Olivia froze. She recognized it instantly. The message was simple. To Olivia. Open only when leadership feels heavier than success. For several seconds, she stared at the envelope without moving. Then her phone rang. Another meeting. Another decision. Another responsibility. She placed the envelope back into the box and closed the lid. The letter would have to wait. Across town, Ethan pulled into the driveway of a modest home on a quiet street. Warm evening light settled over the neighborhood. As he stepped out of the truck, the front door opened, and a young woman in her early 20s appeared on the porch. Lily Brooks smiled. How did it go? Ethan looked toward the sunset and exhaled slowly. About how I expected. Lily studied her father carefully. You warned them, did not you? Ethan nodded. Yes. Did they listen? A gentle sadness touched his eyes. Not yet. And somewhere inside a sealed box high above the city, a forgotten letter waited patiently for the moment when everything would begin to change. 3 weeks passed, and the confidence inside Harrison Dynamics only grew. Press releases celebrated the upcoming Atlas launch. Industry analysts predicted record-breaking adoption. Investors praised Olivia Harrison for her leadership. Every meeting seemed filled with optimism. Every projection pointed upward. Yet beneath the excitement, small warning signs began appearing. They were easy to dismiss at first. A synchronization delay during a stress test. An unexpected recovery loop during a simulation. A temporary reporting discrepancy that vanished before anyone could fully investigate it. Individually, none of them seemed serious. Together, they formed a pattern. On a rainy Tuesday morning, the senior architect sat alone in his office reviewing another overnight report. The fluorescent lights hummed softly above him. Coffee had gone cold beside his keyboard. He stared at the screen for nearly a minute before reaching for Ethan's notebook. The same pages he had studied countless times over the previous weeks. Slowly, he compared the latest system logs against Ethan's handwritten notes. His stomach tightened. The numbers matched. Every one of them. Across the building, emergency messages began appearing on internal communication channels. Engineering managers requested immediate reviews. Department heads scheduled unscheduled meetings. The atmosphere shifted from excitement to concern. By noon, concern had become urgency. Olivia entered the executive conference room to find several senior leaders already waiting. Their expressions told her everything before anyone spoke. What happened? She asked. The chief technology officer took a slow breath. We found a cascading synchronization conflict. Olivia froze. How serious? No one answered immediately. The silence itself became the answer. Finally, the senior architect slid a report across the table. If Atlas launches in its current state, there is a significant risk of widespread service instability during peak demand. Olivia stared at the document. The words seemed unreal. This cannot be happening. It is. How did we miss it? Again, silence. The senior architect lowered his eyes. Someone did not miss it. The room became still. Olivia already knew the name before anyone said it. Ethan Brooks. Outside the conference room, employees sensed something was wrong. Conversations became quieter. Smiles disappeared. Hallways that had recently buzzed with confidence now felt heavy with uncertainty. The launch date remained only weeks away. Marketing campaigns were already running. Investors expected results. Delays could cost hundreds of millions of dollars. That evening, Olivia remained alone in her office long after sunset. City lights shimmered beyond the glass walls. Her desk was covered with reports, risk assessments, and revised projections. Every page pointed toward the same conclusion. Ethan had been right. The realization was painful not because he had identified the problem, but because she had refused to listen. Her eyes drifted toward the archive box sitting near the corner of her office. For several moments, she simply stared at it. Then she stood. The building had grown almost silent. Cleaning crews moved quietly through distant hallways. Olivia crossed the room and opened the box once more. Beneath old photographs and faded company sketches rested the sealed envelope written in her father's hand. Leadership feels heavier than success. The words echoed in her mind. Slowly, she picked up the letter. For the first time since it arrived, she was ready to read what Richard Harrison had wanted her to know. Olivia sat alone beneath the soft glow of her office lamp as rain tapped gently against the glass walls overlooking Denver. The building was nearly empty now. The noise of meetings, presentations, and confident forecasts had faded into silence. In her hands rested the sealed envelope her father had left behind years ago. For a long moment, she simply stared at his handwriting. Then she carefully opened it. Inside was a single folded letter. The paper had yellowed slightly with age. Olivia unfolded it and began to read. My dear Olivia, if you are reading this, leadership has become heavier than success. That means you have reached the moment every leader eventually faces. The moment when confidence is no longer enough. Her throat tightened. She continued, Harrison Dynamics was never built by one person. The world may remember my name, but the truth is that this company was born because two young men believed character mattered more than recognition. One of those men was me. The other was Ethan Brooks. Olivia stopped breathing for a second. She stared at the name. Then she read it again. Ethan Brooks. The same man she had dismissed in the parking lot. The same man she had doubted in the conference room. Her eyes moved quickly across the page. If Ethan ever tells you something is wrong, listen carefully. He sees problems before others see symptoms. He always has. More importantly, he will tell you the truth even when it costs him. That quality helped build this company long before there were investors, executives, or boardrooms. Olivia lowered the letter slightly. Her heart was pounding. She looked toward the archive box and suddenly noticed something she had overlooked before. Beneath several folders rested an old photograph. She picked it up. Two young men stood beside a folding table inside a warehouse. One was her father. The other was unmistakably Ethan. Younger, smiling, standing shoulder to shoulder with Richard Harrison. Olivia flipped the photograph over. Written on the back were 4 simple words. Partners from day one. The room felt strangely smaller. She continued reading. There is something else you deserve to know. When the company faced bankruptcy during its second year, Ethan sold nearly everything he owned to keep. Payroll running. Employees never knew. Investors never knew. He refused to take credit because he believed people deserved dignity, not publicity. Without him, Harrison Dynamics would not exist. Tears formed in Olivia's eyes. Not because of the revelation itself, but because she suddenly understood the calm confidence she had seen in Ethan. It had never been arrogance. It had been experience. Years of experience. Decades of sacrifice. The final paragraph waited at the bottom of the page. If leadership ever blinds you to wisdom, find Ethan Brooks. Listen before it is too late. Respect is not measured by titles, offices, or appearances. It is revealed by character. Olivia slowly folded the letter. Outside, distant thunder rolled across the city. Inside the office, silence settled over everything. The successful executive who had walked into work that morning was not the same person sitting behind the desk now. She reached for her phone immediately. Her hand trembled slightly as she searched for a number. Then she stopped. Another thought had entered her mind. If Ethan had truly helped build the company, there had to be records. Proof. History. She stood and headed for the archive department. And before midnight, she would discover that her father's letter had not exaggerated a single word. By sunrise the next morning, Olivia had not slept. The archive department had given her access to decades of company records, and she had spent the entire night reading. Incorporation papers, early design documents, meeting notes, financial statements. Everywhere she looked, the same name appeared beside her father's. Ethan Brooks, co-founder, systems architect, original investor, strategic partner. The evidence was overwhelming. Yet what unsettled her most was not how important Ethan had been. It was how completely he had disappeared from the company's story. His name had gradually vanished from presentations, annual reports, and public histories until eventually only Richard Harrison remained in the narrative. Olivia sat alone in her office watching the first light of dawn spread across the city. For the first time in her career, she felt embarrassed by her own certainty. 3 hours later, an emergency board meeting was called. The atmosphere inside the executive conference room felt entirely different from the confidence of previous weeks. Financial forecasts had been revised downward. Launch timelines were in question. Investors were demanding answers. Every chair around the massive table was occupied. Quiet conversations stopped when Olivia entered carrying a thin folder and her father's letter. She took her seat at the head of the table. "We have a problem," she said. Nobody argued. They all knew. The chief technology officer stood and presented the latest findings. The synchronization conflict had spread deeper than originally estimated. Additional reviews revealed several connected vulnerabilities. Correcting them would require expertise few people possessed. When the presentation ended, silence filled the room. Then the senior architect spoke. "There is one person who identified every major issue before any of us." Several board members exchanged glances. Olivia slowly nodded. I know. The room became still. She opened the folder and placed several original company documents on the table. There is something all of you need to see. One by one, board members examined the papers. Confusion appeared first, then surprise, then disbelief. This cannot be right, one director whispered. Another adjusted his glasses and looked again. Ethan Brooks. Olivia slid an old photograph into the center of the table. Richard Harrison stood smiling beside a younger Ethan. The back of the photograph contained the same 4 words. Partners from day one. No one spoke. The silence felt heavier than any argument. Finally, the oldest board member in the room leaned back in his chair. His voice was barely above a whisper. I remember him. Every head turned toward him. He was here before any of us. Richard trusted him completely. The room fell quiet again. Outside the windows, clouds drifted slowly above the city skyline. Inside, decades of assumptions were collapsing. Olivia looked around the table. Yesterday I treated him like an outsider. No one disagreed. The truth is that without him, none of us would be sitting in this room. The weight of those words settled over everyone. Then the senior architect broke the silence. Can he fix Atlas? Olivia looked down at her father's letter. She remembered every line, every warning, every lesson about character and humility. Slowly, she nodded. I believe he can. She reached for her phone. Around the table, no one objected. No one questioned the decision. The laughter from the parking lot felt like a distant memory now, because everyone in that boardroom finally understood the same thing. The man they had overlooked was not a visitor. He was part of the foundation beneath their feet. Olivia made the call herself. The phone rang twice before Ethan answered. Hello. His voice was calm as always. For a moment, she struggled to find the right words. The woman who had spoken so confidently in boardrooms now felt strangely nervous. Mr. Brooks, this is Olivia Harrison. A brief silence followed. Good afternoon, Olivia. There was no resentment in his voice. No bitterness. Somehow that made the conversation even harder. I owe you an apology, she said quietly. The words hung in the air. Ethan did not interrupt. I judged you before I knew you. I dismissed your warning. I was wrong. Outside her office window, sunlight reflected across the city. Inside, every executive in the boardroom listened without speaking. Finally, Ethan answered. Thank you for saying that. Olivia swallowed. The company needs your help. Another pause. Then a simple response. I will be there in an hour. When Ethan arrived that afternoon, the atmosphere inside Harrison Dynamics felt completely different from the day he first walked through the doors. Employees no longer saw a contractor. They saw a man whose name had quietly reappeared throughout company history. As he entered the executive boardroom, conversation stopped. Several board members stood. Then others followed. Soon the entire room was on its feet. No one had planned it. No one had suggested it. Respect had simply arrived. Ethan looked slightly uncomfortable with the attention. Please sit down, he said gently. The room obeyed. For the next several hours, he worked alongside engineers, architects, and executives. He asked questions. He reviewed assumptions. He listened more than he spoke. Piece by piece, the solution emerged. Not because Ethan was a magician. Not because he was smarter than everyone else. But because experience had taught him where to look when others were distracted by success. By evening, a recovery plan was complete. The launch would be delayed, but the system could be fixed. Investors would be informed. Customers would be protected. The company would move forward. Relief spread across the room. One by one, people began thanking him. Yet the moment that stayed with everyone came just before he left. Olivia stood and walked toward him. The boardroom grew quiet again. She held her father's letter in both hands. My father said something about you. Ethan's expression softened immediately. Richard always said too much. A few people smiled. Olivia shook her head. He said this company exists because of your character. Silence settled over the room. Ethan looked down for a moment before answering. Your father built great things. So did you, Olivia replied. Neither spoke after that. They did not need to. Some truths become strongest when words stop. Later that evening, Ethan walked back to the parking garage. His old Ford waited exactly where he had left it. The rust had not disappeared. The paint was still faded. The truck looked exactly the same. Yet as he started the engine and drove away, dozens of employees watched through the windows above. Not because of the vehicle, not because of his title, but because they finally understood what Richard Harrison had known all along. Real success is not measured by what a person drives, wears, or owns. It is measured by integrity when nobody is watching, humility when recognition never comes, and the quiet strength to do what is right even after being overlooked. And as the old truck disappeared into the evening light, the glass tower behind it stood a little taller, because the people inside finally remembered the foundation on which it had been built.